We are in the midst of a media revolution. Never before have so many entertainment alternatives been available. From motion pictures to television, from CDs to video games, from the internet to DVDs, all are in tremendous competition not only for our time and money, but also for our affections. When watching a movie, most people believe they're simply being entertained. Likewise, when they hear the news, they believe they're simply getting the facts. However, nothing could be further from the truth. All communication involves the persuasive transfer of ideas, and when technology is added to the mix, an entire system of manipulative techniques are made available to those who control the process. Just what effect is all this media having on society? Some are pointing a finger at the entertainment industry, blaming them for a plethora of cultural problems. Many agree that easier access to violent and sexually explicit material is changing the moral landscape of our nation. Parents are especially concerned about their children and how they are being influenced by this media onslaught. In the next hour, we will be examining the media and the impact it is having on society. And we will be asking the question, are we in fact being entertained to death?
They're bombarding our culture with their own brand of religion, and their value system promotes violence, foul language, sex and promiscuity, alternate religions such as witchcraft. Parents who don't want this value system are finding it increasingly difficult to protect their children from it.
One dynamic that makes the parent's job even more difficult is he doesn't get pressure just from the medium itself, from the theater and its promotional campaign, or from television. The pressure comes from all avenues. It comes in T-shirts. It comes in meals at the fast food chain. It comes from all dimensions, because this cross-marketing of media product is everywhere. So the pressure to consume a media product, because it is being hyped everywhere, makes it very, very difficult for parents to say no and to resist the pressure.
Perhaps no other invention has had more of an impact on family life than television. In the 50 years following its introduction into the home, television has mutated from being a champion of family values to leading the assault against them. A recent USA Today CNN Gallup poll of 65,000 viewers found that 96% are concerned about sexual content on television, while 97% are concerned about violence. 65% felt the entertainment industry was completely out of touch with the values of Americans, while 83% said the industry should make a serious effort to reduce sex and violence in their programming.
You know, the first time TV was introduced to the public was in 1939 at the World's Fair. And then by the early 90s, 98% of households had television. 60% had cable, and more than 2/3 had one or more VCRs. The average American child 2 through 11 watches approximately 28 hours of TV a week. The average teen watches approximately 23 hours a week. And by mid-adolescence, children have watched 15,000 hours of television. That's more time than spent with teachers, friends, or parents combined. In fact, children spend more time watching TV than any other activity.
We're one of those families that's decided that for our children it's much better not to have a TV, and we don't. And frankly, we're thrilled with the way our daughters are growing up.
We've found that at the age of 3, children do not understand the difference between reality and fantasy, commercials or regular programming. And between the ages of 6 and 10, children believe most of what they see on television to be true. And in households with more than one television set, children view by themselves half of the time and only 1/3 of the time with the rest of the family. So that means a lot of kids are in their rooms by themselves watching their own TV, left unguarded and really undealt with by the rest of the family members.
During the 1970s, television networks were asked to reserve the 8 to 9 o'clock time slot for family-oriented programming. Today, as expected, many of these so-called family hour programs feature the same offensive material as those aired during other time periods.
Objectionable content during family hour has risen 75% in recent years. Only 9 out of 37 family hour series were deemed acceptable during prime time. Foul language is up 58%. Violent content is up 86%. Children will have seen 16,000 simulated murders and 200,000 acts of violence by the age of 18.
Crime occurs 10 times more often on television than in real life. Approximately a dozen murders occur every hour during prime time. Violence on television has become so problematic that even 3/4 of all entertainment executives admit they prevent their own children from watching televised violence. Incredibly, in countries where television has just recently been introduced, the murder rates there have doubled, while literacy rates or reading skills have declined.
And then there is sex. Sex is hotter than ever before, with sexual content up 77%. And teen-oriented shows referring to sex, it's up 25% of the time. In fact, that's all you see if you turn on TV shows these days, watching teenagers have sex or talk about sex with other teenagers.
I think maybe to achieve real intimacy, we need to have real intimacy.
A study conducted by US News and World Report found that a sexual act or reference to sex occurred on average every 4 minutes in primetime television. By the age of 17, most children will have viewed at least 400,000 sexual acts on television, primarily between non-married couples.
Foreplay is no laughing matter. How do you expect a guy to do his best work in the face of scorn and derision?
Planned Parenthood monitored 30,000 references to sex per year in primetime TV. And the ratio to sex outside of marriage to sex inside of marriage was 13:1. Now, that's appalling. We are sending a message to our children that if you reach the age of 14 and 15 and you're not out there sexually active like some kind of rabbit, well, then you're a nerd and a loser and a wimp, and what a horrible message that is. And I think that we owe it to all of our children to try to protect them from it.
I'm starting to think that maybe casual sex is the way to go.
A current University of Michigan study found that young women who view just 22 hours of primetime TV monthly have more permissive views of casual sex. Teenagers are shown in bed together, pregnant, and in homosexual relationships. Storylines about abstinence are rarely discussed.
This year, it's fun for all ages as MTV returns with shows you'll be happy to enjoy with your folks. Or not.
Then there's MTV, music television. It pioneered the fast-paced, in-your-face style of programming. And you know what? Youth and teens immediately started watching it, and it caught on.
MTV continues to thrust sex upon its young audience with more than 1,000 references to sex every hour.
The target audience of MTV is 12 to 34-year-olds, with 25% of the audience being between the ages of 12 and 17. MTV reaches 265 million households right now, worldwide. And what are our kids mostly watching? Implicit sex, objectification, dominance, implicit aggression. These are all common on MTV.
A growing number of cartoon and dramatic programs aimed at children and teens encourage viewers to become engrossed in sorcery, witchcraft, and alternative religions. This is especially harmful for children of Christian parents, since involvement in these practices can result in a lifelong rebellion against biblical principles. Detailed instructions in the casting of spells and the use of items needed for ritual magic are frequently woven into the storylines of these productions.
The neo-pagan movement is alive and well on TV, with witchcraft woven into everything from children's cartoons to teen shows. Demons, vampires, and other Wiccan themes are spread across primetime, with practical magic quickly becoming the most popular religion of teenagers.
I want to tell you my secret now. I see dead people.
Movies, television, music, advertising, journalism, the internet, and video games. All of these mediums are designed to convey information in one way or another. While we are usually aware of the content of the material that is being presented to us, we may not be conscious of the subtleties inherent within technological communication, which can distort how we perceive the information. Take movies and television, for example. No matter how hard a director may attempt to achieve realism, what we inevitably see on the screen is a counterfeit world. Lighting, makeup, editing, rehearsed dialogue, music, sound effects, all of these combine to create an alternative world. The choice of camera angle forces us to focus our attention on exactly what the director wants us to see, to the exclusion of surrounding areas. With the use of enticing images, likable celebrities, and dramatic stories, the entertainment and news media both have the ability to manipulate our emotions and thought processes and must therefore be viewed with caution. Jim Herson, a professor of international law and syndicated radio talk show host, has studied how the media is used to shape national and global policies.
When we examine the way that the media influences society, what we really have are three levels of communication, three prongs, if you will. And the first is explicit communication. On the surface, we're looking at the content of the communication in various forms of news media and entertainment media. The second prong is more subtle, technological communication. Unlike the real world, when we look at the real world, we look at actual people, actual events, that what happens to people with technological media is they put together, in essence, a counterfeit world. And that people see the world through a window, but not a real window that shows reality, but through a counterfeit window of technology. And the third level is even more subtle. It's subliminal communication. It is communicated by advertisers, it's communicated by many sources, not what is said, but perhaps what is presupposed. And it's done by affecting semantics.
This counterfeit world, which technology has the ability to create, is probably best illustrated by the medium of the motion picture. The larger-than-life screen, the darkened theater, the Dolby surround sound, all contribute to a heightened sense of awareness, thus making the movie-going experience one of the most influential and popular forms of entertainment today. Holly McClure is a radio talk show host and a noted family film critic whose column is syndicated in more than 360 newspapers nationwide. Her knowledge about the effects of mass media on the family has made her a popular radio and TV guest.
As a family film critic, I'm well aware how much we and our kids love to be entertained. As a matter of fact, I'm well aware how much Hollywood has an influence on our society, our culture, our religion, our values, especially our children and teens. What once was a mere form of entertainment for most of us has now become an addiction that even our children are hooked on. They need to be entertained. In fact, teenagers love movies so much. Do you know that 92% will choose going to movies over any other activity? I mean, sports, going to the beach, playing with friends. Not only have movies become teenagers' main source of entertainment, but it's also become their main source of education. This is where they learn about relationships, their trends in clothing, sex.
Look at you, you're ready for sex.
You're right.
I know.
I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna have sex.
Especially the sexual education part. This is where I'm concerned about. Teenagers rely on movies about sex to get their feeling of who they are, their importance, and how they should interact with other partners. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of movies with heavy sexual themes geared towards young teenagers.
All entertainment is educational. It's just a question of what it teaches. And so it's crucially important, whatever we consume, whether it's a newspaper, a magazine, a film, a video, whatever it is, that we are careful that what comes into our mind is what we want to stay there.
Moviegoers between the ages of 12 and 24 make up approximately 38% of the domestic box office. Hollywood knows these kids and teens are their box office source, so they've manipulated the R and the PG-13 ratings to attract this age group.
Following its invention by Thomas Edison during the late 1800s, the motion picture quickly transformed itself from a mere novelty into a respected art form. By the 1920s, however, decadence had become a common element in many Hollywood productions. As theaters spread across the United States, The grossly immoral content of these early films, which included excessive nudity and the glorification of crime, enraged the American people. To head off the growing threat of federal censorship, the movie industry, in order to police itself, formed the MPPDA, the Motion Picture Producers and Distributors Association, under the direction of William Hayes, a lawyer and member of President Harding's cabinet. Unfortunately, the MPPDA had the effect of lulling moral Americans into complacency by making them think something was being done to clean up Hollywood when in fact very little was. Recognizing the dangerous impact these productions were having on society, leaders from Catholic and Protestant churches pulled together to develop the Motion Picture Code, a set of moral guidelines based on the Ten Commandments. Under the threat of a nationwide theater boycott, Hollywood and the MPPDA agreed to adopt the code. Thus began what is referred to as the Golden Age of Hollywood, a period between 1933 and 1966 which produced some of Hollywood's best and most creative films. However, by 1966, the powerful National Council of Churches had stepped in and abolished the Motion Picture Code. Their awards committee for that year passed over a film on the life of Jesus Christ and instead praised a blasphemous, nudity-laced independent film. Unwilling to take a stand, both the Catholic and Protestant film commissions subsequently relinquished their moral obligations, closed their offices, and retreated from Hollywood. At the same time, Jack Valenti took over as head of the MPPDA, which was renamed the Motion Picture Association of America. Without the moral code or influence of the religious film commissions, filmmakers were now free to include just about any type of graphic material they so desired. The rating system developed by Valenti further encouraged producers to push the envelope in seeing how far they could go in their big screen depictions of sex, nudity, violence, and profanity. War had been declared on biblical values, and freedom of artistic expression would be the weapon of choice.
The Motion Picture Association of America, contrary to popular belief, is not some objective, well-motivated, independent, evaluative agency. The Motion Picture Association of America, which has the rating system with which we're all familiar, the R, PG-13, G, and so forth, is really an industry operation run and funded by film studios to get you to go through the door of as many theaters as possible. So what we have is the fox guarding the chickens. And the rating system is driven largely by a set of criteria that are very, very mushy in terms of definition, and by a group of raters who remain anonymous. We can't even find out who the people are that come up with these decisions.
The MPAA is a very strong organization that studios have a relationship with. Directors, producers, the studio heads, they go to the MPAA and actually talk and dialogue and negotiate about the ratings that they want for their films. This happened in Titanic. James Cameron went to them and said, look, I've got an expensive picture. I've invested a lot of money into it. I can't afford to lose the money, so I need to have a PG-13. Problem was he had some R-rated material in this movie, and so they had to negotiate to give him that PG-13. This was important for him to make the money back on the picture, and of course it went on to become the most popular movie of all time. PG-13 film means any age can buy a ticket. So we had 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds going to see Titanic 3, 4, 5, 10 times to see this 3-hour movie because they could. A lot of parents brought children under 13 thinking this is a movie about the Titanic, about the ship. It's going to have some history to it. They were shocked when they got in there and found out that there was nudity, when the girl was posing nude and being drawn, that there was a sexual situation in the back of a car that implied that 2 teenagers had sex. There was language all the way through this film, so there were a lot of elements in this movie that truly really weren't even for 13-year-olds. But a lot of parents didn't realize that. So the PG-13 rating was a lenient rating that signaled it's also okay to bring kids if you want to. This confuses parents. What's okay, what's not okay, what elements are in a PG-13 film. This is the problem with this rating system.
Also, the MPAA ratings are pretty much useless for a Christian to use as a guide to film consumption because while they may describe visual or sound images, they talk nothing about worldview. You could go to a film that maybe has a G rating in terms of its images. It would have a worldview or a message that would be very much anti-God, very much in favor of some belief system that was in direct violation of everything Christians believe and hold dear.
The R rating was originally designed to restrict children under 17 years of age from gaining entrance into a theatre unless accompanied by a parent. Profit-oriented theatre owners, however, are not required to uphold this rule. 80% of all children under 17 in the US have had no trouble at all getting into R-rated films. A recent study by the New York Times found that children as young as 10 years old were frequenting R-rated films on a regular basis, despite the fact that these films routinely have scenes of extreme violence, sexuality, nudity, and profanity. While the average movie-going adult sees only 6 films a year, the average teenager attends at least 50, with the vast majority of these films being R-rated. Playing on a teenager's desire to see something forbidden, and without any regard for consequence, Hollywood studios continue to produce R-rated films containing graphic sex and violence, specifically for the youth market.
You know, the purpose, the job of the artist in one sense is to push the boundaries, and the job of the conservative, reactionary forces is to say you've gone too far.
R-rated films are being marketed and targeted more than ever before to teenagers under 17. In fact, in most cases to kids 12 through 16, because they know they will come. These days, adolescents and teens view any movie in most theaters as fair game. I mean, mini malls, multiplexes, they've changed the way we go to movies, and they make most R-rated films available to whomever can walk in and sit down. No wonder kids are assuming they can get in to see R-rated movies. No one is really keeping it or monitoring the law and making sure that it applies. Kids are being actually lured in. Sex is being sold to teens on an everyday basis. Today's echo boomers are seeing more sex, more violence, more R-rated movies than ever before. Directors like Warren Zide, who is one of the producers of American Pie, actually made this statement. He said, "We really feel like some of the funniest things that happen in high school are R-rated, and we felt like the marketplace was shifting and that the audience wanted an R-rated picture." In other words, what he's saying is kids, his audience, wanted an R-rated picture, not necessarily the parents. That audience is our children under 17. And once again, parents' concerns are nowhere in the decision. Their concerns about what their kids should see aren't even taken into account. Hollywood is setting a standard, and they're telling us, they're telling you as an adult, they're telling your children, they're telling your teenagers how they should and shouldn't act. And they're saying it's norm. They're saying it's a reflection of society. But whose society? Whose standards?
There is in Hollywood a consensus of values. I think that probably is the thing that puts Hollywood most out of phase with typical Americans. As a rule of thumb, the leaders of the film and television business, the entertainment business, are twice as likely, statistically, to approve things that normal American citizens feel are wrong. For instance, they're about twice as likely in Hollywood to be accepting of adultery, of pornography, of homosexuality, of sex among teenagers and other things that most Americans would feel are wrong.
The situation in Hollywood has gotten enormously worse. We have just an avalanche of language on the simplest level. And you see, the point that Hollywood always makes in its own defense is we just give the public what they want. This is a big lie. It's a great big lie. Because if you look at the language, who wants the language? What's the audience? Have you ever heard of anybody coming out of a movie theater saying, gee, I'm just disappointed because the language in that movie was too clean?
Language is a good example of the extent to which Hollywood is out of phase with the American people. Commonly, American people in business and professional context do not use the F word. And yet you can go to a Hollywood film and by actual count, have from 20 to 200 uses of the F word or other examples of foul language. And as Michael Medved says eloquently, no one ever said, gee, I wish that film had had more F words, I certainly would have enjoyed it more. And yet, since that's the language of many of the people that produce and create the films and write the film scripts, that is the language that comes through, despite the fact that it's not language used in much of the leadership levels of American society.
And all of a sudden this big shark comes. Get it? I can say that, can't I? Well, you can say it, but we can't air it.
So because their values are very much out of phase with those of the American people, their values tend to come through and become actual propaganda messages in the films that they make.
Humans have a herd instinct. a pack instinct, the desire to be accepted, the desire to be loved. And this worldview that's communicated communicates fashion or style of thought. And so society, especially younger members of society, want to be accepted, want to be in, and want to be part of that fashionable, stylish thought process.
Young people today are emulating what they see on the screen more than ever before, not only in style of dress and language, but more ominously in the areas of sexuality and violence. After decades of denying that movies influence behavior, 87% of studio executives now admit that violence in mass media contributes to violence in society. More than 3,000 serious studies on the subject have made the evidence irrefutable. The Journal of the American Medical Association recently announced that more than a third of all criminals convicted of violent crime have admitted to consciously imitating techniques they learned from the media. Films such as Oliver Stone's Natural Born Killers have inspired countless numbers of copycat crimes. According to national police records, these types of media-inspired crimes are on the rise.
I look at a violent movie and whatever I seen on the movie is what I imitated.
In addition to violence, sexually explicit media is being targeted at increasingly younger audiences. More than 90% of children under 18 years old have viewed extreme hardcore X-rated materials. Of these, more than 50% say they wanted to copy what they had seen, while 25% actually did so within a few days of viewing the material. Children of all ages, some as young as 4 years old, have sexually assaulted siblings and neighbors after viewing their parents' pornographic materials. Since 1966, the year the church abandoned Hollywood, illegitimate births have increased 420%, while violent crime has increased 560%, particularly among the youth. Towards the end of the 1990s, shootings on school campuses became commonplace. Films such as Basketball Diaries, along with video games such as Doom and the music of Marilyn Manson, are believed to have served as inspiration for the horrific shootings which occurred at Columbine.
As violence in the movies grow, we see a daily acceleration and aggressive replay of horrible violence in all places. We see this carried out in schools, in churches, we're seeing it on TV and the news at night. 44% of adults fault movies or TV with affecting the youth violence, with affecting the breakdown of family and social values in our country.
It's critically important, the stuff we put in our minds, because what we consume, we become. So if I consume something that's violent, I'm really vicariously experiencing and practicing violence. Like someone has called this virtual sin, because sin is maybe distant from us if someone else does it. But when we play the images of sin, sex, or violence through our minds, we're kind of vicariously experiencing that, and that becomes part of our own personal experience and eventually translates into our own action.
There's a new strain of evil that's alive and well in Hollywood, really more than ever before. It's called the psychological thrillers, and they are dominating the box office. In years past, there were movies like Halloween, Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and they were the big moneymakers, they were the big hits. They had a formula that directors loved, and it proved well. It made them a lot of money. There were movies like Matrix that used computers and digital technology, and they revolutionized filmmaking, and it changed the way special effects and violence could impact a movie. There was the movie Blair Witch Project. The cerebral thriller is what they were calling it. It became popular. The Sixth Sense also came out that summer. It became the biggest box office sleeper of '99. It launched a string of movies devoted to ghosts, Satan, the Antichrist, witchcraft. God is either rendered helpless or he's nowhere to be found. And evil has taken on this huge force that people are actually becoming fearful from. How does all this scary stuff affect kids? Well, there was a survey that was taken at the University of Michigan and Wisconsin, and they found that 1 in 4 students had some lingering fright effects from a movie or a TV show that they saw as a young child or teenager, particularly movies. That's what impacted kids and teens the most. 90% said they were scared by a movie that they saw in their childhood or their adolescence, and 26% said they still experience residual anxiety.
In the 20 years I've been working quietly inside the film and television industry, the question I've gotten most, I think, from Christian parents is, why do they produce the stuff they do? What explains it best to me is the words of Jesus: out of the overflow or abundance of the heart, a person speaks, writes, produces, performs. It's a heart condition that motivates people to include what they include in their films, in their scripts, in their productions, in their television shows. As God changes hearts, we can document that the material, the content, the values change, because once their hearts change, the overflow of their hearts is very different.
You know, God was once reflected in Hollywood. He was here. We have movies like The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, wonderful biblical epics. Now they're all deemed religiously incorrect. Family, traditional marriage relationships, Judeo-Christian values, a respect for humanity, an appreciation for life. I mean, we had these in this country at one time, and they've all been watered down. They've all been transformed, not only on screen, but really in our society, so that a whole generation of young people have no idea what values, what ethics were once held as a standard for this nation.
In a nation where 40% of Americans are in a church or synagogue every weekend, in Hollywood, 93% seldom or never attend a religious observance of any kind. So this devout secularism influences their worldview and makes them kind of propositionally and by belief system at odds or in opposition to Judeo-Christian values.
I have been amazed at the level of genuine, sincere, frightening hatred and hostility toward religious believers of every stripe that you get from secular extremists right now. It's very scary to me. I think it's the only kind of bigotry that is considered politically correct and acceptable, and boy, you see it in a lot of regards. Just utter contempt, utter hatred, tremendous fear, total lack of understanding. You know, part of what is necessary in a pluralistic democracy is that we all have to respect one another and try to get along together. But the attitude that you have from Hollywood, where every time someone in today's world is portrayed as a religious believer, that person is viewed as some kind of a crook or a deviant or a weirdo or an ugly person, or something's wrong with him or her. It's poisonous.
A very recent phenomenon in this country is what I call an anti-Christian bias. It's being promoted by the media. It's being promoted in the universities, in the public schools, and so on. There's one group that can be attacked with impunity, and that is the evangelical Christian.
The media consistently portrays those that are pushing Christian values as the enemy in many ways. In content, we see Christian characters portrayed as bigoted, narrow-minded, and intellectually challenged.
I think the single most dramatic example of how out of phase morally and in terms of worldview that Hollywood leadership is with the American people came in 1988 with the release of the film by Universal Pictures called The Last Temptation of Christ. In this film, Jesus is portrayed as a wimpy, lust-driven, bedeviled individual. Actually, Judas is more of a hero than Jesus. And in one horrific scene, Jesus is shown in a dream sequence having sex with Mary Magdalene. The stunner of that was that the leaders of Universal Pictures, MC Universal, didn't have a clue how offensive this would be, not just to Americans or to Christians, but to Americans of a not particularly Christian disposition. And so Universal Pictures, despite tremendous opposition, they got 25,000 people marching outside their offices. They got 120,000 letters a day. They got so many phone calls they didn't do any work for 6 weeks at Universal Studios. They still released the film. And so they went ahead and flew in the face of everything that Christians and even moral people that weren't Christians held dear. And I think it was a shock. It's the single biggest protest in the history of film. Never before had any film by any distribution or production company created such a furor globally. And the film lost money. It lost $14,378,000 or something close to that. But I think the very fact that they would release the film showed not necessarily malice, but just a total ignorance of how widely different their viewpoint about life and God and morality and spiritual things, and certainly Christ, were from those views held by the rest of the populace.
Despite Last Temptation's dismal showing at the box office, Hollywood has continued to undermine the biblical God in general and vilify Christians in particular. Today, more than 2/3 of all media portrayals of Christians are negative. This list represents only a fraction of the motion pictures coming out of Hollywood that portray Christians as either fools, liars, racists, hypocrites, sadists, adulterers, perverts, rapists, child molesters, murderers, or cannibals. Despite the critical acclaim that many of these movies receive, their box office is often disappointing, especially when compared to films featuring a pro-Judeo-Christian message. For example, both MGM and Paramount were on the verge of bankruptcy in the late 50s and were saved as a result of the success of the films Ben-Hur and the Ten Commandments, respectively. More recent films, such as Chariots of Fire and Dead Man Walking, continue to garner both critical and commercial success.
There was a movie out recently called Dogma that just belittles and attacks Christianity in a horrible way. And the actress who played God in this movie is a rock star named Alanis Morissette. In Rolling Stone magazine, she said, in essence, she said that Christianity taught me that God is judgmental and vengeful. But years later, I realized that God is compassionate and has no preference about how we live our lives. Now, this is the God that the media embraces, a watered-down God. Here we have an actress who happens to be a rock star in a movie that trashes Christianity, speaking out outside of her role in the movie and trashing Christianity with her rhetoric and substituting a counterfeit spirituality in the form of a kind of a neo-paganist view of God. And what's interesting is that the roles of celebrities are not just their spoken roles or their acted roles, it's also their conduct in life. And a good example of that, of course, that melds into their role was Ellen DeGeneres, who brought her outside lifestyle into her role and came out in public on the show, thus again validating that lifestyle and making it fashionable, stylish, appealing to the herd instinct.
Hollywood is reflecting its own standards. Hollywood is reflecting what they believe in.
Before I ever went to law school, I majored in music, and I always made a living playing in bands, and I did tour for a couple of years with the Temptations as their keyboard player, and I did studio work, and I've experienced the way music can communicate to an audience and the power of music. And over the years, incrementally, I think music has changed. I think there's been more of a communication of moral anarchy, to coin a phrase, in the area of moral chaos, in communicating hedonism, communicating a focus on self, and once again, that subliminal message of what is fashionable thought, that herd instinct, which is very, very strong in adolescence, is taken advantage of to the detriment of society.
By the mid-90s, only 10 out of the 40 most popular CDs had no profanity and no lyrics that glamorized drugs, violence, and sex. Only 10 out of the 40.
Many advertising agencies continue to push the boundaries of good taste in the never-ending pursuit to get their product noticed. Whereas in the past, advertisers were careful not to offend audience members for fear of a financial backlash, today they seem to relish the idea of creating controversy.
You know, sexuality is advertised all around us 24 hours a day. Parents can't even take their children into a grocery store without shielding their eyes from provocative covers on fashion magazines. And what are the effects of this constant bombardment of sexuality on women? Well, all you have to do is take a look at bulimia and anorexia. They've skyrocketed in recent years. More than ever before, the media forces us to focus on image. To be successful, popular, and beautiful, you have to be thin. In a survey of girls 9 and 10 years old, 40% have tried to lose weight. 40%. Co-director of the Center for Media and Public Affairs, Robert Lichter,
in his testimony before the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, advised Christians looking for careers in the news media to remove any hints of their faith from their resumes if they hoped to get a job. Why? Because the anti-Christian, pro-left bias of the news media is so pervasive. The Washington Post describes evangelicals as largely poor, uneducated, and easy to command, while CNN chairman Ted Turner has gone so far as to simply refer to Christians as bozos and idiots. During her distinguished career, pioneering journalist Jane Chastain has experienced prejudice on two fronts, initially as the first woman reporter in the male-dominated sports world, and later as a result of her conservative views. Currently, she hosts her own radio program, which is syndicated throughout the country.
When people come home and they turn on the nightly news, they're looking for an overview of what happened that day. But when they turn on the nightly news and they see stories on cataract surgery for dogs or the latest diet craze, then they're lulled into believing that nothing really of importance is going on that needs their attention. And when this happens day after day after day, they are lulled, if you will, into complacency.
News has been a very competitive area of the media. And maybe because of its competitiveness, news and entertainment are blurring. The news seeks ratings. And so you'll see these stories that have nothing to do with the news that just appear to be fluff and entertainment. But at the same time, the news is shaping policies and attitudes.
The bad news about these additional television networks, the cable networks, is that it has caused all of the news programs to fight for the ratings. And a newscast is never a match, for example, for a primetime sitcom. So in an effort to attract more viewers, they have become more and more entertainment-oriented. And so while they focus on the sensational, there are actual votes being taken in Congress on issues that affect our children and our ability to raise our children. For example, the average American had no idea that there was an important vote being taken on whether or not your minor daughters would be allowed to be taken out of school without your knowledge or consent and given an abortion. Did you hear about it before that vote was taken? No.
George Orwell wrote a book, 1984, where he talked about a concept that in the book was called newspeak. And in the fictitious tyrannical government that was in that book, they contended that those that control the semantics, control the language, will control thoughts. And that's exactly what we're talking about in the playing field on the media. Someone that wants to defend the sanctity of marriage is now labeled a homophobe. The idea of changing language, changing the taking of a life in the womb to a woman's right to choose. And when you change this, what you do is numb the listener, numb society to the reality, turning them closer to the idea of moral anarchy. Another example has to do with people that take the Bill of Rights seriously. Individuals that will go out in public and say, for example, that the Second Amendment says what it actually says, instead of being considered those that cherish freedom, they're called extremists. They're called gun nuts. And once again, the media is putting them out of the mainstream, not dealing with the merits of what they have to say. Another example is in New Jersey, where the Declaration of Independence was proposed as reading for children in school. And those that opposed it didn't deal with the merits of whether the Declaration of Independence should be read. What they did was categorize it as racist and sexist, thus marginalizing it and not dealing with its content.
Those who are responsible for gathering the news are supposed to be blank slates, completely unbiased. But of course, that's not reality. All of us come to our jobs with some ideology, some belief system. And if I have a say-so over what is covered on the nightly news, and I see some votes that are about to happen that really don't advance the agenda that I believe in, that I think is important, well, I just might send my crew out to cover the flowers in the rose garden or some cabinet secretary's speech, which is really a non-event.
A watershed event was the Nixon-Kennedy debates, because for the first time, television played a role in who won. As a matter of fact, surveys showed that those that listened to the Nixon-Kennedy debates on radio thought that Richard Nixon won the debate. But those that watched on TV and saw what was happening in pictures thought that Kennedy won. And this changed the face of politics. And politicians learned their lesson well. They now had new people on staff that had to be media consultants, media experts, to deal with how to manipulate people using this new medium.
How can we know when we watch the news whether or not we're getting the important news of the day or whether we're getting a watered-down alternative? And if you're watching a newscast day after day and you haven't heard about important votes coming up in Congress or your state house for that matter in several days, or you don't hear about those votes until after they happen, after it's too late to do anything about them, then you need another news source.
Now, as a radio talk show host that has participated in this new medium that is now being called many names, the new media, the alternative media, actually I refer to it as the authentic media, it is more important than ever for America. And of course the reason is because the internet, talk radio, grassroots organizations are a way for citizens to get at that rare commodity that they're not getting from the press, that is the truth. And it is the truth that they'll get through this medium that ultimately preserves the precious freedoms that we have in this country.
On the internet, there's a world of places to turn. For example, some of the best sources where you can get information quickly would be WorldNet Daily. It would be Conservative News Service, Newsmax.com. These are all excellent sources of information. But of course, perhaps the easiest source to access today is on your radio, on the way home. Talk radio. Statistics tell us that people that spend at least 1 hour a day listening to talk radio on their way home are much more informed than people who don't.
Anyone that regularly participates in what I'm calling the alternative media finds out very quickly that there is a myopic radar screen that the mainstream media keeps itself focused on. And there's tremendous stories that are outside of that radar screen that are eliminated selectively from the mainstream media that you will find in the alternative media. And those stories are crucial and important, and more Americans are participating in that alternative media. That's why the alternative media is growing.
The spectacular growth of the internet in recent years has reshaped our culture in a number of ways. On the bright side, seekers of truth can learn about important news stories without the filter and spin of the left-leaning mainstream media. There is, however, a darker side. While cyber enthusiasts promise a cultural renaissance filled with unlimited knowledge courtesy of the information superhighway, they fail to take into account man's fallen nature. Computers help reinforce man's general tendency towards moral and spiritual corruption and encourage a desire to seek self-centered self-satisfaction regardless of the consequences. This can best be illustrated by a recent investigation by Yahoo, one of the largest search engines on the internet. They found that 18 of the 20 most common search words used were sexual in nature. That means 90% of those who use the internet primarily seek out sexually explicit pornographic material. In 1939, David Sarnoff of RCA projected that the medium of television would raise the standards of the American people with high-quality entertainment. Unfortunately, his lofty predictions failed miserably. Sadly, there's no reason to believe the internet won't follow the same downward spiral. The sheer volume and depravity of this electronic assault will only increase, as will its availability to younger and younger consumers. Equally disturbing is today's neo-pagan explosion, which can be largely attributed to the internet, which occultists refer to as the portal of transcendence. Pagans from all over the world can now communicate and even perform ritual magic online through an ever-expanding number of highly networked, occult-oriented chat rooms. In computer games, players are given the power to go beyond natural, ethical, and spiritual boundaries and are frequently encouraged to seek revenge, kill, and destroy. The effect can be intoxicating and dangerous. Video games are now required by law to include a disclaimer warning players that they may induce previously undetected epileptic symptoms even in persons who have no history of prior seizures, and that loss of awareness, disorientation, or involuntary convulsions can result. These symptoms are similar to those which can result from drug use, hypnosis, or demonic possession. Time and reality can become distorted and behavior dangerously modified. It's therefore no surprise that cyberspace has been referred to as the new designer drug, capable of providing compelling hallucinations and addiction to millions of unsuspecting travelers.
I think when we look at the power of the media and look at what it's capable of, it's more important than ever for parents, first of all, to inform themselves, to understand what they're up against here, and secondly, to scrutinize every single element of media that reaches into the home. And that would include cable TV, the internet, video games, even publications, and get involved to the point where they are able to counter this media agenda. And of course, as always, they have to counter with a clear set of moral principles. And there is no better set of moral principles than those which come from the Bible.
The barrage of entertainment product on our families has probably been the single most significant thing in making parenting more difficult in the past 20 or 30 years. We are in a media generation and we cannot insulate our kids from media. But the management of media is an area in which Christian parents have been woefully inadequate. Research by Barna and Associates indicates that most Christian parents not only don't manage the flow of media into their homes or into the lives of their kids, they actually consume statistically the same amount and very much the same kind of product as people who make no claims to being Christians at all. The scriptures say that we should have nothing to do, not even a hint, we should set before our eyes no vain, worthless thing. And the Apostle Paul made it very clear that we should only consume into our minds, hearts, and lives those things that are good and noble and pure and honest and truthful and of good reputation. Manage the flow of media content into your home so you make sure that nothing vile or destructive comes into your home at all.
You know, there's nothing wrong with good entertainment. As a family film critic, I see over 200 movies a year, but not all that I see is good entertainment. In fact, there are only a few that I'd really like my own children to see or that I would deem good entertainment. As parents, we can't protect our children or teenagers from the influences of Hollywood, but we can teach them to become discerning in their entertainment choices. Recognize that what you see as morally wrong and unacceptable may not necessarily be the same for your child or teenager. What they see on TV or in movies may be okay to them, and you need to find that out. Help train your child or teenager to become media savvy so that when you're not around, they can learn to discern for themselves. When they're with their friends going to a movie, when they're spending the night, when they're over at someone's house, or even when they're by themselves in your own home, help train your child that what they see on TV, what they surround themselves with, affects them long after they turn the TV off or walk out of that movie theater. Kids these days love power. Empower your child with the ability to say no to their friends and to themselves when they're exposed to negative or harmful entertainment influences.
Many parents have been delighted to learn about the Dove Foundation, a non-profit organization designed to encourage and promote the creation and distribution of family-friendly entertainment. The Michigan-based group, located on the web at dove.org, doesn't simply criticize the media but assists parents by identifying entertainment that is safe for family viewing. Films and videos are evaluated using Judeo-Christian ethics and, if deemed acceptable, receive the Dove Family Approved seal. To date, more than 5,000 movies, videos and electronic games have been approved. In addition to providing entertainment reviews for iBelieve.com, the Dove Foundation helps to meet the demand for family entertainment at the local theatre by hosting family film festivals in various cities around the country.
In the last 30 days, my teenage son has said to me, "Dad, my friends are going to such and such a movie. Is it okay if I go?" I say, "I'll call you back in 15 minutes." Upon which I get online to a Christian rating service called Preview. I check in, give them my password. I get a rating from a Christian perspective as to what kind of content, with precision, not some vague PG-13, whatever, but a specific description of the message of the film, the content of the film, how many bad words, are there any sex scenes, is there any violence, if so, how's it shot? And then I call my son back in 15 minutes and say, "Yes, you can," or "No, I really don't feel comfortable with your doing that. If your friends can pick another film that was more in keeping with our values, then of course I'll joyfully support your attendance." But that kind of attention to detail is the only way I think that a parent can be responsible in managing the flow of input into the minds and hearts of his or her kids.
It's a war. It's a cultural war. It's a moral war. It is a battle that's being fought out in many venues, from education to the media, entertainment, academia, and so on. So if people don't see that there is indeed a cultural war going on, they're not looking at the facts.
Requesting that Hollywood limit its promotion of sex and violence inevitably results in screams of censorship. Yet, those in the media who yell the loudest about freedom of speech are often the same people who believe that prayers at a graduation ceremony must be eliminated. They believe it's okay to mutilate women on the screen, but not okay for school children to read the Ten Commandments. Generally speaking, the entertainment and news media would rather curse Jesus Christ than respect those who praise him. History reveals that God has condemned those nations that reject and disobey him. Since the mass media encourages us to do just that, shouldn't this country be concerned? The media is at the forefront of one of the most intense spiritual wars raging today. It uses images designed to pull at our desires and seduce our thoughts. Fortunately, there are people in Hollywood that are doing something to change the tide. Production companies such as Noran Entertainment and distributors such as Providence hope to bring back the golden age of Hollywood by releasing films that reflect the values upon which this country was founded.
For a long time, I kept thinking about how the films, in their speech and a lot of the behavior in the films, the nudity and a lot of the innuendo and sexual activity and all those kind of things, just kept going down, down, down. And so it got to where I love movies, and I couldn't go to a movie with my grandkids or even with my wife. There was things that it made me feel uncomfortable, and I didn't like it. And it made me angry, and I kept thinking, why didn't somebody make some good, exciting, creative, adventuresome films, but yet are decent? So that's how I got in the movie business.
One of the most encouraging things to me in the past few years has been the rise of a number of very responsible production companies, distribution companies, top professionals that say, we're tired of this stuff. We want to do nothing but redemptive, valued, commercially viable product.
If they build better movies, if they give us better entertainment alternatives, people will appreciate those alternatives, and I think we'll flock to them.
So there never has been a time that's for us to be more crucial for talented young men and women to go into Hollywood. They can get support, they can get prayer encouragement, they can get accountability, they can get fellowship, and they can change this industry from the inside out, which is, I believe, the only way it's ever going to be changed.
We can't stop Hollywood's influences, or for that fact, the world's influences on our children or our teens, but we can take an active stand against them. Don't be intimidated by your children's attitude when you take an active role in what they see or do. Remember, you're still the parent, and your child or teenager, in the long run, will respect you for it. Our greatest battlefield is for the minds and hearts of our children. As parents or concerned family members and friends, we need to fight for those minds and hearts that Hollywood is targeted to destroy. So when given entertainment choices, choose wisely, and don't let Hollywood entertain you to death.